Alright, so yesterday, finally, the Game Awards announced the nominees of Game of the Year 2023, which I was personally really curious over, because I've said this multiple times, but this year has just been absolutely nutty, man. There were so many good games, to the point that I'm barely able to play any of them. Next year is probably gonna be a lot more pale in comparison, because like the only real big game that I'm really excited about is probably like Little Nightmares 3 and Silk Song. Of course, you have like a bunch of like indie games that I'm really excited for, like Demon Spore or Hashtag Blood, but big titles, honestly, I'm not really sure. But that's besides the point. The games that got nominated for Game of the Year, I mostly agree with. I wish there was one spot reserved for like a really good indie game, but I get it, man. This year has been absolutely crazy. But that's kind of what I want to talk about. I want to talk about indie games and nominations today, because a lot of discourse has been happening around this, and it has caused a little bit of controversy, and I want to give my 2 cents on it. So usually in the Game Awards there's a category for independent game, you know, for indie games. They usually can't compete with the big boys, as you know, it's smaller teams, less resources, so you know, they give a coin to the little guys, which I always really like. I really like the indie scenes, and I think for the first time, correct me if I'm wrong, but this year there are 2 indie categories. Best Indie Debut, which my boy is in, it better win, but you know, the competition is really tough, and Best Independent Game. And here is where it gets really messy and where the controversy comes from, because all of these games that are nominated, besides Sea of Stars, I think, aren't really independent, in my eyes at least. The big controversial one, between quotations, is of course Dave the Diver, which I really liked, and I even made a small video on it. This game is made by Minto Rocket, who are owned by Nexon, which is, I think, a South Korean company. And Nexon is big, like really big. They are mostly known for MapleStory, but yeah, this clearly means that Dave the Diver is not an independent game. On their wiki it even says they're not an indie company, which I guess they're not if they're owned by Nexon. Personally, now I might be completely wrong with this, but I always thought that indie meant a smaller than usual team worked on it, like maybe like 12 or 30 people worked on it. I see 3 categories when it comes to like video game team sizes. You have AAA, I think of like Marvel, Spider-Man, or Call of Duty. Then you have AA, like an in-between that isn't like skyrocketing in budget, but still has like a decently sized team. And then you have indie games, which are usually like a lot smaller. And indie games are usually also a lot cheaper, but that's not always the case, because Bomb Rush Cyberpunk is considered a indie game, and that game still costs $40. So the meaning of indie, on the other hand, means like it's not belonged or affiliated to like a major like company. But I feel like in the gaming world that whole word indie game has just been completely twisted and mushed up. It's just something that has happened over time, you know? Because if you look at games like Neon White or Cult of the Lamb, Enter the Gungeon, like all of these games still have publishers. Devolver Digital, for example. Devolver Digital is worth more than $100 million, and I still consider the games they publish indie games and not AA or AAA, because a small team has worked on these games. Devolver Digital just helps with the publishing side of everything. And that brings me back to Dave the Diver, because this game, only about like 30 or so people worked on it. If you look up how many people worked on Dave the Diver, it says about 30 or so. But because Mint's Rocket is owned by Nexon, it's not considered a indie game anymore. But then on the other hand, like Cocoon was published by Annapurna. Does that still mean it's an indie game? Because Annapurna is worth quite a lot of money. Like the only game that is like actually completely independent on this list is Sea of Stars, and I'm really like perplexed that Pizza Tower is not on this list, because that game is 100% completely funded through Patreon, if I'm not mistaken. It's just like it's a little, the situation is really bizarre and weird, and it messes a bit with my head. But it's not like this is something that has been like new, because in 2015 I think Best Independent Game went to Rocket League, but one of the nominees was Ori and the Blind Forest. I'm pretty sure that Ori and the Blind Forest is an Xbox game, and Xbox is owned by Microsoft, one of the biggest companies in the entire world, and people still consider that game an indie game. I guess Cuphead kind of falls into that same category, although I don't think Xbox owns Studio MDHR, they just helped fund it a bit, and in return Cuphead was a timed console exclusive on the Xbox. But still, that means they didn't do it fully on themselves. They got funding from Xbox. And still, it won Best Independent Game of 2017, even though it had funding from like one of the biggest companies in the entire world. You know, it's all just a bit confusing. Like, I'm not trying to take away awards from certain games, because all the games that are on this list in both the indie debut and the independent categories are all great. It's just that the word indie game has like become like very vague in my opinion. Like, I'm not even sure if I should consider Dave the Diver an indie game. It's definitely not an independent game, but an indie game? It kind of fits that narrative, but at the same time it doesn't. So the way I look at it, okay, is that I think that an independent game is a game that was made 100% independently, without any help from publishers or like owners. Sea of Stars fits that narrative. Pizza Tower fits that narrative. Dave the Diver and I guess Cocoon does not, because they got help from a bigger company. I'm sure that Cocoon still had complete freedom to do whatever they want, but they did get help with marketing and publishing. Indie games, on the other hand, I just see as a small group of people making a game, like a Hollow Knight or a Binding of Isaac, or even a Viewfinder or a Cocoon. I all think these are indie games, even if some of them get help from bigger companies like Devolver Digital or Annapurna. Because they have a small team, I still consider them indie games. I mean, I even consider Ori games indie games, which I guess they're not, because they're owned by Microsoft. I don't know, man, just this whole situation has been a bit confusing. I just think that this category in the Game Awards is just really stupid, and honestly, the game that should win is Sea of Stars, because it's the only independent game on this list. But you know, I'm just a little loser. Yeah, that's really all I want to talk about. Let me know what you guys think about this whole situation. You know, I might be completely wrong in how I view like indie games and independent games, but this is always how I've viewed things. But yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Alright, bye bye, see you later, bye bye.